Cheers, everyone. Dave Brown here with the New Populace. Thank you again for joining me. Now, we are about 20 months into this Ukraine Russia conflict, and day to day, not a whole lot changes. We just had 4 months of this Ukrainian counteroffensive where there was very little progress made. And right now, the Russians are creeping up on Advika, a very well fortified city, much like Bakhmut. And the operation there for the Russians will take probably months for them to root out Ukrainian forces there. So this war just drags on, and it seems the strategy for the Russians is to try to attrit the Ukrainian forces. Now, something very interesting came out today, an article from the Washington Post, because a lot of us, we talk about the genesis of this conflict, the involvement of the United States in Ukraine, and many people put forth that the United States was involved in overthrowing the Ukrainian government, that we have turned Ukraine into a puppet. And when you say this, you are sometimes accused of being a conspiracy theorist. But little by little, we get evidence that's released that, if you put it together, paints that picture. So with that in mind, we have an article from the Washington Post titled, "Ukrainian Spies with Deep Ties to CIA Wage Shadow War Against Russia." And I've always talked about the Washington Post, New York Times being mouthpieces for U.S. intelligence. And this article, if you're wondering why they would print this or release this, well, as I read the article, you will see that there are members of the U.S. intelligence community who are a little worried about the activities of the Ukrainians, and they're trying to cover their backsides by saying, hey, we saw some stuff we didn't like, and here we are letting you know that we weren't involved in it and that we weren't comfortable with it. So I'll read part of this article, and you will see exactly where these officials are, again, trying to cover up for themselves. And it's a very long article, and I'm just going to read the first parts of it, which are the important parts, which tell exactly what the U.S. has been doing the last several years in Ukraine. The cluttered car carrying a mother and her 12-year-old daughter seemed barely worth the attention of Russian security officials as it approached a border checkpoint. But the least conspicuous piece of luggage, a crate for a cat, was part of an elaborate lethal plot. Ukrainian operatives had installed a hidden compartment in the pet carrier, according to security officials with knowledge of the operation, and used it to conceal components of a bomb. 4 weeks later, the device detonated just outside Moscow in an SUV being driven by the daughter of a Russian nationalist who had urged his country to kill Ukrainians. An explosion signaling that the heart of Russia would not be spared by the carnage of war. The operation was orchestrated by Ukraine's Domestic Security Service, the SBU, according to officials who provided details, including the use of the pet crate, that have not been previously disclosed. The August 2022 attack is part of a raging shadow war in which Ukraine's spy services have also twice bombed the bridge connecting Russia to occupied Crimea, piloted drones into the roof of the Kremlin, and blown holes in the hulls of Russian naval vessels in the Black Sea. These operations have been cast as extreme measures Ukraine was forced to adopt in response to Russia's invasion last year. In reality, they represent capabilities that Ukraine's spy agencies have developed over nearly a decade since Russia first seized Ukrainian territory in 2014, a period during which the services also forged deep new bonds with the CIA. The missions have involved elite teams of Ukrainian operatives drawn from directorates that were formed, trained, and equipped in close partnership with the CIA, according to current and former Ukrainian and U.S. officials. Since 2015, the CIA has spent tens of millions of dollars to transform Ukraine's Soviet-formed services into potent allies against Moscow, officials said. The agency has provided Ukraine with advanced surveillance systems, trained recruits at sites in Ukraine as well as the United States, built new headquarters for departments in Ukraine's military intelligence agency, and shared intelligence on a scale that would have been unimaginable before Russia illegally annexed Crimea and fomented a separatist war in eastern Ukraine. The CIA maintains a significant presence in Kiev, officials said. Now, so since 2015, that's what they're alleging here, the CIA has been deeply involved in Ukraine. And what I find interesting is that's their starting point, 2015. And they said Russia illegally annexed Crimea and fomented a separatist war in eastern Ukraine. But we're actually covering up something here. Why did Russia annex Crimea? What are they leaving out here? This was in response to the 2014 coup, in which, I'll put forth, the CIA was also involved. So it's sort of a chicken and egg thing. Which came first? Was it Russia's actions or the actions of the CIA? And I think ultimately it was the actions of the CIA helping the Ukrainians overthrow the government that led to Russia annexing Crimea. And why did they do that? Well, they have their very important naval base there, Sevastopol, and their concern was with this new puppet government controlled by the U.S., they did not want to lose Crimea and that very important naval port to the new Ukrainian government. And it would be an absolute catastrophe if there were ever U.S. Naval vessels parked at Sevastopol. That would be unthinkable. So after this coup, this is when Russia annexed Crimea. And of course, the Russian population, or the ethnic Russians in the Donbass, did not want to go along with this new government that they thought did not represent them, and that kicked off this long civil war, which eventually led to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But the article continues. The extent of the CIA's involvement with Ukraine security services has not previously been disclosed. U.S. intelligence officials stressed that the agency had no involvement in targeting or targeted killing operations by Ukrainian agencies, and that its work has focused on bolstering those services' abilities to gather intelligence on a dangerous adversary. A senior intelligence official said that any potential operation concerns have been conveyed clearly to the Ukrainian services. Now, if we are propping up Ukraine, we are giving them money. Right now, their entire government is being funded by the United States. To say that we are voicing concerns about what they're doing, but it implies that we're powerless to stop them. If Biden called Zelensky today and said, hey, if you continue these operations, we're going to cut your funding, what do you think would happen? Those operations would stop. So it's very disingenuous here in this article where they're trying to claim that we warned them against certain things, but hey, they're going to do what they want. Many of Ukraine's clandestine operations have had clear military objectives and contributed to the country's defenses. The car bombing that killed Daria Dugina, however, underscored Ukraine's embrace of what officials in Kiev refer to as liquidations as a weapon of war. Over the past 20 months, the SBU and its military counterpart, the GUR, have carried out dozens of assassinations against Russian officials in occupied territories, alleged Ukrainian collaborators, military officers behind the front lines, and prominent war supporters deep inside Russia. Those killed include a former Russian submarine commander jogging in a park in the southern Russian city of Krasnodar, and a military blogger at a cafe in St. Petersburg, according to Ukrainian and Western officials. Ukraine's affinity for lethal operations has complicated its collaboration with the CIA, raising concerns about agency complicity, and creating unease among some officials in Kiev and Washington. So again, this is where they're going, we're not too comfortable with this, but again, we do have control over what they do because of our funding. So some officials in the U.S. government and the intel state are concerned, and this is how they're trying to voice their concerns and say, hey, we tried to say something within the agency that we shouldn't be doing this, and we were shut down. So ultimately, the Biden administration, the director of the CIA, they're allowing this to happen, and there are intel officials who are not happy with it, and they're trying to voice their concerns here at the Washington Post. Even those who see such lethal missions as defensible in wartime question the utility of certain strikes and decisions that led to the targeting of civilians, including Dugina or her father, Alexander Dugin, who officials acknowledge was the intended mark rather than Russians more directly linked to the war. We have too many enemies who are more important to neutralize, said a high-ranking Ukraine security official. People who launch missiles, people who have committed atrocities in Bucha. Killing the daughter of a pro-war firebrand is very cynical, the official said. Others cited broader concerns about Ukraine's cutthroat tactics that may seem justified now, especially against a country accused of widespread war atrocities, but could later prove difficult to rein in. We are seeing the birth of a set of intelligence services that are like Mossad in the 1970s, said a former senior CIA official, referring to the Israeli spy service long accused of carrying out assassinations in other countries. Ukraine's proficiency at such operations has risks for Russia, the official said, but it carries broader risks as well. If Ukraine's intelligence operations become even bolder, targeting Russians in third countries, for example, you could imagine how that might cause rifts with partners and come into serious tension with Ukraine's broader strategic goals, the official said. Among those goals is membership in NATO and the European Union. This article is based on interviews with more than 24 current and former Ukrainian, U.S., and Western intelligence and security officials who spoke on the condition of anonymity, citing security concerns as well as the sensitivity of the subject. The pressure on Kiev to score victories against Russia and find ways to deter further aggression create incentives to exaggerate the record and capabilities of Ukraine's services. The Post vetted key details with multiple sources, including Western officials with access to independent streams of intelligence. The CIA declined to comment. Shocker. They would not comment. So, again, this article is showing the discomfort of some officials with what we're doing in Ukraine, and they're concerned that in 5 years, 10 years, whenever, when we look back and we see just how far we went, this is going to be very, very troubling. And for people like myself and others, this is not surprising again. We knew what the CIA has been doing in Ukraine, and we are in many ways responsible for this war. And just to really emphasize this, I've mentioned these topics in other videos. I want to just cover them again, just again to show you how we progress to the point where we're at. Because if we don't recognize that and understand that, we are going to repeat the same things in other parts of the world. War will break out. We will claim that the other side was the aggressor, and we will ignore everything we did to make things worse leading up to that event. Taiwan looking right at you. So back in 2008, we have this very famous WikiLeaks memo from Bill Burns, who was the ambassador to Russia, who was the current CIA director, and he said, Ukraine and Georgia's NATO aspirations not only touch a raw nerve in Russia, they endanger serious concerns about the consequences for stability in the region. Not only does Russia perceive encirclement and efforts to undermine Russia's influence in the region, but it also fears unpredictable and uncontrollable consequences which could seriously affect Russian security interests. Experts tell us that Russia is particularly worried about the strong divisions in Ukraine over NATO membership, with much of the ethnic Russian community against membership, could lead to a major split involving violence or, at worst, civil war. In that eventuality, Russia would have to decide whether to intervene, a decision Russia does not want to face. And so again, 2008, our current CIA director said, if we mess around here, we're going to cause a civil war, and at some point Russia might intervene. We messed around. The coup 2014, civil war for 8 years, 2022, Russia intervened. So again, we knew what we were doing, and there's the famous 2019 RAND article, Overextending and Unbalancing Russia. And what did they say we could do? Well, they said we could provide lethal aid to Ukraine, which we have done, of course. Increase support to the Syrian rebels. Well, we have been funding the rebels against Assad. Promote liberalization in Belarus. We had Victoria Nuland from the State Department admit that we are in contact with opposition elements in Belarus. Expand ties in the South Caucasus. Reduce Russian influence in Central Asia. Flipping Transnistria. And we have, except for the last one, really done a lot of those things there. Right now we have the situation with the Armenians, and the current Armenian leader is very pro-U.S., anti-Russia. Of course, we have our tentacles there. What else? They said we could diminish faith in the Russian electoral system, and we always talk about how their elections are rigged, maybe like ours. Create the perception of the regime not pursuing the public interest. Well, what do we always say? It's Putin. He's a dictator, and he's destroying Russia for his own benefit. Encourage domestic protests and other nonviolent resistance. Well, Russia banned NGOs from doing that back in, I think, 2006 because, of course, they were concerned about these NGOs being fronts for U.S. intelligence and undermine Russia's image abroad. Well, that has been going on since 2016. Russia is the boogeyman, and the irony is we complain so much about Russian interference into the 2016 election, which of course was greatly exaggerated, yet we have been very, very diligently trying to destroy Russia, to encircle them, to harm them, and going into Ukraine was the final straw for Russia when we helped to overthrow that government. And as the Washington Post admits, our CIA has been there for 9 years, building this apparatus, which their entire purpose is to go after Russia. Boy, I can't imagine why Russia invaded. Why do they do that? For no good reason at all. One day Putin said, you know what, I'm going to start a war. Come on, folks. We had our nose in there, and our strategy was to bait Russia into a war, throw on sanctions, and try to collapse the Putin regime and turn Russia into Ukraine or Germany, another vassal state of the West. And unfortunately for us, that strategy backfired. Their economy did not collapse. Matter of fact, this year their economy is growing. They have increased their ties to other countries in the region, and specifically China. And we are the ones who are overextended, not the Russians. Now we have the Israeli thing going on. We have the Taiwan thing going on. We got Biden giving a speech begging for money for all three of these things, $100 and something billion. We have $33 trillion in debt. Who's overextended here? The United States or Russia? Well, this is what you get when you have incompetent leadership like the Biden administration. And this is why the 2024 elections are so important. This is just 3 years of Biden leadership. Imagine another 5. This guy's incompetent. His administration's incompetent. And I just can't imagine what might happen if this guy is reelected in 2024. I mean, that spells disaster for this country. So, for the love of God, vote for anybody but Joe Biden. Well, that's it for now. If you are new to my channel, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.